Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. It's always a pleasure to come back to Stanford. I studied here 95, 96, but I've been here so often that it continues to feel like home. I'm going to talk a little bit about India and then draw the associated parallels of what's happening here as well. Before I do that, Richard wanted me to introduce my company, Indus Age, briefly. We are an Indo-US venture fund. We are a early stage venture fund, typically Series A, sometimes Series B, about $150 million fund, and we invest out of at startups both in India as well as in the US. Now, what's going on with India? I wanted to give you a perspective of what has happened and then from that extract out to what could happen in the future. Now, first of all, look backwards. Now, this is a landscape view of the last 15 plus years, and if you look at the time period 2007 to 2009, there was a moment of exuberance when people said, oh my gosh, this is where we should be, let's pour a lot of money into India, and they did, and that was soon followed by a lot of depression. About $30 plus billion went into infrastructure, IT and IT-enabled services, and not very satisfactory. There are only about 140 some exits, mostly M&A, out of 1,500 some companies that were invested in. So by and large, one can imagine that this was a somewhat bad time for VCs and private equity players. Now, the thing that happens in many of these markets is to say, maybe we should incubate companies. Innovation through incubation is the way to go. So governments throughout the world start pouring money into incubators, and lo and behold, a lot of incubators came along. And why do incubators happen? The notion is, well, we can create an innovation factory, right? We can put some financing structure, provide infrastructure, governance, a team maybe to manage the inflow, some networking, a bunch of advisory services, mentors, and lo and behold, you think there's a factory. People apply, they get vetted, they get funding, and you wonder, okay, magic is going to happen at the end of that, and we're going to get huge numbers of companies going public. So India did that as well. We have 200 some odd incubators now in India, spread out through not only large cities, but small and medium cities as well. A lot of these were put out at universities, and typically computer science departments, mechanical engineering, or sometimes creatively an innovation department. And typically an incubatee company would get about 1,000 square feet of space. Maybe they would get funding for 2.5, 3 years, and then they would leave. But the story of triumph from incubators has been relatively poor. It's very difficult, it turns out, that you have large numbers of people come in and say, please come up with magical ideas and create the new world. Then we prayed a lot and we got some angels, right? So the angels came from above, and in India there were a set of people who had been educated in a variety of institutions, not only the famous ones, the IITs, the IIMs, but also a host of other institutions. India is lucky to have a lot of engineering colleges, and many of these then went abroad and studied again at the MITs, the Stanfords of the world, and then they worked abroad as well. So a significant number worked, and they now started to get gray hair and became older and wiser. And now these people, with a fair amount of money, decided that they were going to make a difference. So they started playing, they created angel networks, they organized themselves as the Mumbai Angels, the Chennai Angels, the India Angel Network, etc., and they started plowing money in. Now, they started investing in things they knew about. So typically in science and engineering, using their business focus in IT and IT-enabled services, into telecom, media, entertainment, e-commerce. Now these are people who have a feel for what is possible. They often have come here, worked in an eBay, worked at an Oracle. They have a sense for the market play here, and so they are putting in their money where their experience lies. So they have a sense for what is traction, how should you look at gaining customers versus gaining revenue. In the earlier type of investment that we had in India, what used to happen was there was a lot of focus on get to the money, get to revenue. Now that kind of a focus, what it does is it forces the entrepreneur to focus too narrowly on outcomes and not broadly enough on the platform, the enabling environment, and to be able to get the community going. So that focus on a short-term run to revenue is often possible in services. Now India, as you know, is the world's leader in IT services. 2 million plus Indians know a variety of languages, and in many ways Indians dominate this market globally. And a lot of that strength comes from the way it's done out of India, but services-based companies have cash on hand. They take a contract, money is there on hand, and usually they are quite profitable. So gross margins can be 30-40%. So companies are often quite rich. So multi-billion-dollar companies like Infosys, Cognizant, etc., were created, and that set the framework for maybe you ought to look at Indian companies as revenue-generating companies versus value-generating companies, right? So unfortunately, that colored a lot of the early investments as let's invest in companies which will make money right away, right? The ATM for services, if you will. These angels, on the other hand, came in with a somewhat broader view of creating value and maybe going after a broad market share of things. So now, what happened in a broad period up to 2013? Out of all the investments that were done, the exits were relatively few. Only a few managed to put in to get their money out, right? So 10-20% returns over a 5-year time frame, but most of them did not make money at all. And that is the sad story. This is true of venture capital broadly, by the way. This is true of venture capital even in the US. Over the last 10-15 years, venture capital has not made much money. And the reality is we hear of all the stories of things have gone public, M&A, this, Google has bought that, etc. But all said and done, we don't hear of the many that don't survive, who don't get the subsequent rounds and are wiped out. So investors into India were cautious, but at the same time continued to be interested. Indian private equity is disappointed in the last few years, but LPs see India as a destination with huge potential. Another one says, while the current sentiment is negative, India continues to be structurally attractive because its long-term domestic consumption and cost-efficient export base is intact. The enthusiasm for India has waned, but there are many LPs who look at India as a must-have for their portfolios in the long run. The question is, why do they have such sentiments? India is a very significant part of the world population, as you all know, and getting bigger. It's also a very large economy. If you measure it on a purchasing power parity basis, it's the third largest in the world. On a global GDP basis, it's probably 8th or so in the world. Still, a very important country which has overall underperformed its competence or capabilities. Now, out of all this, what does the entrepreneur think? Well, let's see. The entrepreneur thinks that these are the things which work. There is global expertise. I can hire the people I need. Starting a business is less messy than it used to be. And by the way, entrepreneurship is actually being celebrated because we've had a few successes, a few Indian billionaires. What is missing? There's a lack of an Indian flavor of entrepreneurship. That is, there is an American version, and everyone thinks, okay, I can create the Silicon Valley in Bangalore, and is that the way to go? And it turns out that's not that easy. There's not that coherent an angel and advisor ecosystem which grooms or provides a runway on how to get to success. And Indian buyers, both for the software that is created as well as the exit, are relatively immature. So Indian companies in general hate to buy software, literally. They think software should be free, right? The air we breathe, the software that we get should be free. Other challenges, India has been unpredictable in the rule of law, which, for instance, you want to start a company, you go to the registrar of companies, there is a hassle. You want to rent a building, there's a hassle, etc. So a lot of hurdles in the way of setup, and relatively poor support from government and scaling issues once you get to be a certain size in terms of hiring, firing, etc. So readjusting a company. But the good news is high net worth individuals are putting in money. Lot of hangouts, startup hangouts occur in India, and it is now cool to be an entrepreneur. It used to be that if you told your dad or mom, I want to be an entrepreneur, they might faint, you might have to call the doctor. They'd say, why don't you join a good company like Infosys? What's wrong with you? After all, you need to get married, kind of thing. Luckily, that kind of issue has gone away, and people are willing to say, oh, interesting. What are you going to do? Now, what is the perspective from a VC? There's a mind shift from IT services to creating far more value. There is booming mobile adoption, and we'll go into that in more detail. And m-commerce is catching on very fast. Unfortunately, Indian entrepreneurs think that they need to be valued at Silicon Valley levels. So there's an unreasonable expectation of valuation. Someone starts a company and he says, 4 of us are US returned, naturally you should give us an $8 million pre-money valuation. And he said, wait a minute, what exactly are you doing which deserves that? They said, that doesn't matter. I've got a cool name and I've registered the URL. Right? There's an ecosystem for value creation. I'm sorry, that doesn't exist. And the India exit options are very poor. So often you're looking at, okay, are there other players who are going to buy us out? Challenges, companies are still losing money. Now there's scaling to get the land grab in the many ecosystems that exist in India, and that's quite a challenge. Fulfillment and logistics are very poor, especially in the hinterland. India is about a third of the size of the US, widely distributed, 600,000 some villages. So India is still a challenge to get around. But what is changing? Big private equity and VC players are in the game. Tier 2 cities are adopting e-commerce, and Indian startups are starting to take on giants. So the game is starting to get interesting. From the VC perspective, in many ways, VCs are now quite bullish, quite positive about the India game. But they are unhappy 24 hours a day. That comes with being a VC as well. So what do they grumble about? There's a lack of exits, less than expected returns, quality of GPs, competition from other markets, regulatory issues, the slowing down of the Indian economy, and the economic slowdown in general, and political instability. So there are many things on their minds, and reasonably so, right? And these are all things that should concern them. Okay, but as Sherlock Holmes would say, Watson, the game's afoot. Not a word, into your clothes and come. And literally the game is changing. Just as we think that things are bad, the darkest hour is indeed before the dawn. So let me show you what the dawn looks like. Let me talk to you about a magical couple. This is Ganesh and Meena Krishnan. And this couple has done amazing things over the last 15 plus years. First, they had a company called Customer Asset that they sold. Subsequently, they started Tutor Vista for $100,000. Tutor Vista is the business of, let us give you a tutor online that can be used remotely. So let's say a student here has got struggling in math, signs up with Tutor Vista, and lo and behold, that student in Mountain View has a teacher from India who says, okay, let me show you how to do calculus, right? So they set this up essentially taking the IT services model, which is doing software for big companies, into doing training, educational training for the world. Quite successful, sold to Pearson for a couple $100 million. They are active angel investors in 25 startups, and their portfolio is worth well over 300 million. The things that they do, Ganesh is the master strategist, he has a big perspective, and Meena is the one who brings the operational focus on getting things done. Within their portfolio, they now have Potia Medical, which intends to be India's largest healthcare company. It's already present with 25,000 home visits, 1,000 plus employees. And look at the backers behind each one of these things. HomeLane is intending to look at interior design solutions. Avagma is set to essentially be an educational provider. Bluestone is for fashion jewelry. In India, there is a gentleman by name of Ratan Tata. Tata is famous for, some of you might know the Nano car, the Tata Nano. But beyond that, Tata is known to be India's foremost business house and an amazing, amazingly ethical and an outstanding player in this field. And he came and saw what these guys had in terms of selling jewelry online. Now, the Indian tradition of buying jewelry is to go to these jewelry shops and they would lay out all the possibilities and people would buy. India is the largest buyer of gold, for instance. As a consequence, these merchants would have their wares open, and that had a lot of consequences. It's difficult in India to navigate, urban traffic, to get to the place that you want, to be able to browse at will, etc. And the notion is, let me show you how to do it online, and people will come and deliver it for you at home. In India, actually, a lot of things work that way. So let us say I wanted to buy a car in India. I would call up the car dealer and say, I would like to test the car. The car would come to my house. I would take it for a ride and then decide that I want to buy it, and I would do all the paperwork at home. So a lot of these things happen in terms of a service-based economy, which is customer-centric. And finally, Big Basket, which focuses on e-commerce to the home. Let me talk to you about another giant. This company, InMobi, started off with two founders looking at Mkoj, which is creating an imitation of Google for searching. Koj means search in Hindi. They then get a little bit of funding from Mumbai Angels. So from the investors see the entrepreneurs with a credible background, they now start giving some funding. The company proceeds, and now the Valley Network, which as you know has got very strong Indian connections, starts to get involved. So Sherpalo Ventures is Ram Shriram, who was the first investor into Google, and then Kleiner Perkins, they get into the game, they put some money in. Now the advantage of these kinds of investors is they've seen the play. They know that it takes, you need to invest and you need to be patient and you need to take risk. So you can see that the company then starts to try other things. They get into Europe, they get into South Africa, etc. The same VCs now reinvest. They put more money in and launch into the US market. Revenues are growing, but sales are also, losses are also increasing. They now go into acquisition, buy something up. Now at this point, obviously due to the performance of the company, the credibility of the entrepreneurs, as well as the VCs who are involved, now big players like SoftBank get in. So they put in a couple $100 million, right? Sales are continuing to go up, losses are increasing, but at the same time, more acquisitions are happening. And now, as they proceed through this, they now have one of the largest mobile advertising environments in the world, comparable to Facebook. They do about 1 billion, they attend to about 1 billion customers, focusing on customer experience on mobile, strongly driven by data analytics, and they have name-plated customers for it. So very large play there. So what's happening overall? India is playing for what I would call the new market economy. This new market economy I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail, but let me set up the background here. India is the second largest network in the world, hyper competitive and extremely affordable. If you have been to India, you'll see that cell phone rates and data roaming rates are ridiculously cheap, probably 1/20th of the pricing here, right? Third largest set of internet consumers in the world, and basically what Indians have done is they've bypassed desktop and the web age to jump directly into mobile. The first experience for most Indians is of a phone which magically does things for them. So a farmer's kid might use the phone to find out, okay, should I go into the city to find a job or to inquire about goods and services? I remember when I was young, 30 plus years back, it used to be India had such such a poor telephonic network that the dad used to say, this family phone is now will be the property of my eldest son because he's my favorite son, and that is written into the will. And the reason was it was impossible to get a phone in India. Only the government manufacturer made it, and typically the wait was 6 to 8 years to get a phone. Luckily, all of that has changed with cellular. So you can look at the landlines is about 28 million, the mobile phones are 800 plus million. So a complete change in the way in which Indians think of a phone. Now everyone has a phone. The other day we had dinner with Richard and his colleagues. I was saying that it's likely that today in India, you go to a slum, there's no roof, there's no water, there's no food, there's no job, but for sure that person has got a cell phone, right? So some of the most advanced technology in the midst of a lot of poverty. Now India is still about 60+% rural. All the green is rural India in about 600 plus thousand villages, and this is urban and semi-urban India. Now think of all of these starting to consume in a world that consists of the 3 C's of the market, new market economy: cloud, connectivity, and consumption. Now what does this do? First, let's talk about connectivity. I told you India is now connected. Connected not just in terms of networks, but connected in terms of devices. So now you have a very large number of Indians having access to some device which has the ability to extract intelligence, right? So smartphones, feature phones, tablets, phablets, you name it. Out of this connectivity now comes consumption of a variety of things, and I will show you low end as well as high end consumption shortly. But this connectivity enables consumption of products and services. This consumption then fuels or demands new services from the cloud. So new players get in and say, oh, but I could create that, this could happen, etc. This cloud then provides services which foster increased connectivity. People say, oh, I should buy a tablet for my kid, or I should change to a new smartphone. It was thought that Indian consumers would be fascinated by global products, the Samsung, the Google Nexus, or the iOS and Apple phones and devices. Quite surprisingly, there have become a few Indian players who have competed very aggressively in this market, to the point where Samsung is now losing market share significantly. And this comes about because the way the supply chain has changed dramatically. The key is often to find what the consumer needs and to be able to rapidly innovate. And the wonderful thing about what China can do and what Taiwan can do is you give them a design, in 3 months it is produced and available in the retail shop. So Indian companies like Micromax, Carbon, Lava, etc. have been very aggressive, produced very remarkable designs. For example, one of the first things, and Nokia had a stranglehold on the Indian market. It used to be that you went to India and you saw everyone using Nokia. Now Nokia is not to be found. And the reason is the local innovation. So the first thing that, and I'm now talking feature phones rather than smartphones, one of the 2 brothers were standing near a tea stall, and they saw a long line of people waiting. And they were wondering, why are so many people waiting in front of a tea shop, right? Turns out that the tea shop provider was providing the charging outlet for people to charge their phones. So they would charge it and then go back to their villages where there is often no power. So what these 2 brothers came up with was to design a phone which had longer battery power. So they took a feature phone, multiplied 2x, 3x the battery power, and that absolutely took off, and that was the beginning of Micromax. So at the same time, there's another very interesting thing happening, which I call technology systems are democratizing. So we are going from what are called systems of record to systems of engagement. In systems of record, these are typically large ERP systems They are rigid and heavy. They are enterprise driven. It favors the big entrenched players. It's often gated and insular, difficult to integrate to, and inside enterprise data centers. So in this world, which occupied all of us for 25 plus years, it was often difficult to create something that could plug into an Oracle, could plug into an Intuit, could plug into an SAP and become big. You could do it, but often it did not favor the people who are far away, who are not connected. So if you're in the valley, you create an adapter, a tool set, a new framework, and you had friends in Oracle, you go talk to them, absolutely you could do it. But what if you are 3 guys sitting with a buffalo in India? Can you do it? No, you cannot, right? There is no way you can provide that kind of coherence to a platform which is completely sealed off. In contrast, we are now moving to systems of engagement which are flexible, light, viral, user driven. They are in public and private clouds, easy to launch and extend, and this now favors the global entrepreneur. You can launch what you want into mobile app store, modular and federated, and suddenly you can create value at a distance that in many cases surprises these guys. They have no clue that these kinds of values are being created, these kinds of new systems are now available. So the power of this technology system becoming democratized is that the advantage is now shifted to the person who is flexible, technology centric, aggressive, willing to take a risk and put up things on the app store and see if it works, right? And this is true not just for India, for anywhere in the world. It basically has changed the world upside down in terms of defining what is software. So let me go all the way to 2 wonderful kids, 11 years and 9 years old. They started the company. Sanjay became the CEO of the company. He allowed his brother to become the president, right? Must have been a lot of negotiating going on at the dinner table. And they learned basic C, Objective-C and Java, started programming. And they started building mobile apps. Wanted to be Steve Jobs, right? And before long, they started producing apps and started creating waves. I talked to them this morning, and they said they are building a low-cost virtual reality device to compete with Oculus Rift. And they have a design for Google Glass, right? Look at the power of technology, and once we allow people to communicate, what amazing things can happen. So these kids have published 7 apps in the App Store, Apple App Store, 4 in the Google Play. They have had 60,000 downloads from 52 countries. And they've been recognized in India as well as outside. They told me that they participated in the MIT Forum in India recently. So amazing kids, but it just tells you that if you put your mind to it, anything can be done. So India is changing. India is changing very dynamically. India is changing in ways that are not apparent, but now let me tell you about things that have happened recently. It's no longer a coalition government at the center. The recent elections have produced a government with a full majority versus the last 10 years where we had a badly fractured government which could not take decisions. Among the various nations of the world, India is starting to look like an economic bright spot. Growth in China, while still positive, looks to be coming down to 6 to 8%, which for China is considered depressing. The new government has focused on what they call minimum bureaucracy, maximum governance. So far indicators are good. We'll have to make sure that things happen, but India is starting to look better and better. For the VCs, the book values of their investments are improving and M&As are starting to happen. So all in all, things are looking more cheerful. So I'd argue that India 2015 is the right place, right time. New government, no coalition, strong focus on governance. The technology has been democratized. This is happening obviously on a global level, and global entrepreneurship is being unleashed. In India, there's a very strong technology base. There are a lot of millions, a couple million people who understand technology because they've been serving, they've worked at IBM Global Services, they work for Cognizant, Infosys, and numerous other players. And as a consequence, the familiarity with technology is extremely good. And there are wonderful success stories to prove that it is possible to become a billionaire using, being an entrepreneur. At the same time, the economy is starting to improve quite dramatically. A billion plus mobile users, inbound FDI, and most importantly, Indians are buying through m-commerce at a rate which is amazingly surprising. Let me talk to you also about things which are inherently domestic. Just like China has, there are compelling companies which are China-centric, which is difficult for an external person to crack. There are a few Indian things that Indian entrepreneurs have cracked, which are illustrative of the way things work. Let me first talk, and the word Desi means Indian. Let me first talk to you about this company called Just Dial. Just Dial is the equivalent of Google search. And the way it works is as follows. You don't need a smartphone. You just call a number. I think it is 888-8888 or something like that. You call that number, there are 8,000 agents standing by, and they have essentially all the yellow pages at hand digitized. So you call up and say Mountain View Pizza, they can immediately ensure that an SMS comes to you from a particular Mountain View Pizza place. And that comes because they have listings. They have about 12 million listings of businesses in India, every city, every neighborhood. They are then able to rank it just like Google ranks it. The highest guy gets to the highest slot. And therefore, when you say Pizza Mountain View, that top guy who has paid the most in terms of the advertising slot gets the shot. They're making a fair amount of money. They are a public company and profitable. Thank you. So that's Just Dial. Let me come to Zip Dial, which is even more interesting. Indians hate to pay for things, okay? Now, in India, unlike the US, when you make a call, you pay money. When you receive a call, you don't. So Indians don't like to make the call and pay for it, even though cell phone rates are dropping dramatically. So they invented this thing called a missed call. So let us say I drop off my wife at the bus stop, and I want to know that she has reached work safely. When she reaches work, she gives me a call, but I don't pick up the phone. I realize that it is a message to me saying I've reached. That's why she's called. So she would call and terminate the call, right? So that messaging system obviously has value. So a lady, I think a Stanford graduate, Valerie Waggoner, who lived in India, she and another person called Sanjay Swami started talking, how do we use this phenomenon, right? Is there value to this behavior? And they realized, yes, there is a lot of potential. So this is what they created. They went to a lot of advertisers and said, we will give you unique zip dial numbers, right? You then popularize these zip dial numbers in various places, in contests, in bus stops, and so on. So let's say I am an air conditioner manufacturer. So when on my hoarding, I'll say zip dial this number. When that number is zip dialed, there is no cost to the caller. Instead, that number goes through the network and is captured as a mobile caller looking for a referral on this particular item. That is then translated to a line for further communications. So that manufacturer, let's say, of the air conditioner would then be able to send an SMS back, and increasingly with smartphones, other ways of providing information, which says, hi, I understand you're interested in an air conditioner. We have 20% off this month. Our shop is located here. So now you have opened up a channel, and all of this now is captured through analytics. This has become an amazingly cheap way to launch campaigns for large companies. And the beauty of it is customer opt-in is inherent in this process, right? Redbus. There were three people working in Bangalore, one of whom wanted to get to Hyderabad, which is a city about a couple hundred miles away, and he rushed from one bus transporter to another, but could not find a bus to get home. India is a very poorly structured road transport market. A lot of operators, not enough visibility on how many seats are available, how to get to those seats, etc. So often you have to get to the bus stop or the terminal and hope for the best. These guys have organized this. They are now created a system where they have rationalized it. There are 30,000 red bus outlets, 1,500 bus operators use them, 80,000 routes are being served, mobile phones based reservations, etc. A dramatic simplification of how you can take a very unstructured, poorly organized system and make it organized. And finally, we come to India's fascination with marriage, right? Of course, there are of course a lot of people. We need to get 100+ million people married on a regular basis, so it's a non-trivial problem, right? Now the issue is, when I was growing up, there were only 3 C's. Now I understand there are 6 C's. The 3 C's were caste, career, and cash. Okay. Cash was more not from the bridegroom side, it was often from the bride side. So India had a dowry system and all those things. A lot of those things are going away. But let me come to the 6 C's that they saw. Okay, you have to choose your companion. In Western society, you choose it by a reference system, dating system, meet in colleges, etc. All those things are not as easily available to the hundreds of millions in India now. So what do? They go to Shaadi.com and a variety of other players like that, and they look for 6 C's: compatibility, chemistry, commitment, community, communication, and compassion. Now, if these were there when my wife married me, no, I might not have gotten married, right? So anyhow, they've done quite a remarkable job in creating an industry. Let me come to the David versus Goliath stories. These are plays where people, large companies typically from the US want to come into the Indian economy and be a giant. Now these are not difficult to overcome. I mean, these are very difficult to overcome, and Indian players have tried to match themselves against that. So let me talk about the first one, Flipkart. This is Indian e-commerce trying to be an Amazon. 2014 sales of about 3 billion. The company is valued about 7 billion. July 29th of this year, they got funding of 1 billion from GIC and Tiger Global. GIC is a Singapore-based fund. Amazon comes in. It's doing $1 billion already in India, valued at 144 billion minus 8% or so today, something like that. And the day after it was announced that they got $1 billion, Jeff Bezos came and said, but I'm putting in 2 billion into Amazon India, just to let you guys know, right? So this is going to be an interesting battle. And obviously big investors are betting that an Indian local player can match their wits against Amazon. The second is Snapdeal, which is an Amazon plus Groupon model, sales about $1 billion. It received 100 million from Temasek earlier this year, matching itself against Groupon. Groupon has not done well in India. They entered India, they goofed up, they left, they are now back. We'll have to see how it plays out. How much they put in India is not known. But one interesting thing is they had what is called the Great Onion discount. And onions in India are extraordinarily popular. And there was a time when there was an onion crisis, not enough onions in the land. And so Groupon said, this is the opportunity. Let's buy up a lot of onions and have the great onion sale. Unfortunately, when they did, they didn't count on the fact that onions are extremely popular. And immediately the Groupon servers in India crashed. So, so if you're going to do the onion sale, make sure you protect your servers. Finally, Uber. Uber is obviously relatively new, even for us, right? 3+ years here. And what I was surprised by, I was in India recently, is Uber in India works quite well. So they have come rapidly into the Indian market and set up a series of operators. So I asked an operator, how do you get to Uber? He said, in India there are a lot of taxis who are owner owned. So they just, they called them up and they attended a 3-hour program. They said, this is an iPhone and this is a locked system. All you have to do is switch it on, it comes on to Uber, right? And you can't do anything else with it. This is how you operate it. Let me check your car, let me check your license. You are now an Uber driver, right? Within hours, they had created Uber drivers. Quite a remarkable entry point into India. The nice thing for them is India is not as organized as France, Germany, New York. So the objections to an Uber are relatively low, right? Works amazingly well. I was very impressed. What is even more impressive is the local player is copying an Uber immediately. So he's got Ola Cabs, he's got funding, he's got a reasonable valuation, and he's able to operate equally well. So here you see that this tussle is on relatively equal footing, and this comes from technology being democratized, right? If I see your business model and I know how to do it, I can replicate your app as well as you create it, I will replicate it. In some cases, I will go better than you. So that is a perspective of how India is changing. I'm going to give you a few case studies of companies that I know better. eDreams is a company that is looking at the education market. India needs to educate some 500 million plus people. So India is a relatively young country. What this company is trying to attack is what they call the learning deficit. The teacher, which is true equally here, often teaches to the median, is unable to teach to the spectrum because there might be some students who are racing ahead of the class, some students who are lagging. What does the poor teacher do? He or she tries to teach to the middle. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't do justice to any of them. What this software tries to do is to say, let me look at your potential to learn, let me understand your deficit, and create a personalized learning experience for you. So the company there has an engine, patent pending, based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's deployed today for grades 2 to 8. So they've done it in for 50,000 plus students, 100 plus schools, fairly profitable. The way they work the system is they show the principal and the teachers that if you adopt our system, your students can learn at home. The software will learn about how well you're doing, how well the child is doing, and automatically start giving it more quizzes, more questions on the right areas, etc. So good sales traction, good funding, the company is on its way. Here's another company called Wooker. Wooker is a company that Indus Age has invested in, and we think of this to be a remarkable global company. What does Wooker do? Wooker empowers the end user in terms of performing a variety of enterprise functions. So we have created enterprise software over the last 25, 30 years in terms of financials, manufacturing, supply chain, e-commerce, CRM, etc. And then you have some social media which has got functionality which is often external to these kinds of softwares. Or you have dedicated software like SharePoint or Salesforce. What Wooker says is, I can provide most of the things that these platforms do in ways that you want, and you do it yourself. You create the orchestration that is relevant for your company dynamically versus accept the orchestration that is inbuilt inside an Oracle ERP or an SAP ERP. So that kind of flexibility changes the outcomes. So Here's when I was talking to the CEO, here's an example that he gave me. So let us say there are large franchised shops, let's say McDonald's, Starbucks, etc. Now the structure of these things is that the centralized functions, procurement, revenues, employee management, etc., is managed through ERP systems. But think of things like placards, bulbs, exit signs. Who manages those? What enterprise system would manage those kinds of things? The reality is those are minor things in some financial spreadsheet, right? To tackle those kinds of things is extraordinarily difficult, yet it is terribly important. In a WOOCR, it is easy to do, and that allows you to tackle things like, let me set up a system for management of all bulbs in the company, right? And so when you know that there is a bulb which has gone out, you get a signal which says, okay, 20,000 bulbs have gone out, need to be replaced. That can have a trigger to procurement. So those kinds of systems, easy enablement of enterprise orchestration is what WOOCR does. So here are the set of possibilities for sales, resource management, customer feedback, learning, employee engagement, skills assessment, human resources, hiring, town halls, products, new product demonstrations, sales training, motivation, customer history, service catalogs, operation scorecards, compliance, licenses. Any of these things can be orchestrated and managed through the WOOCR platform. So it has turned out to be quite a powerful system, gaining a lot of traction. Almost 400,000 users, 3,200 use cases, 9.2 million hours of usage, small team, lot of functionality built in, and already a profitable company. So we are very pleased to see the evolution of WOOCR going from a lot of Indian environments to now increasingly global. They've done Marks and Spencer in UK. They are tacking to good organizations, good large organizations in the US as well as in Europe. So that's WOOCR. Let me talk to you about another company which is also fascinating. In India, electricity is a huge problem. While there are urban and semi-urban grids, rural electricity is actually quite challenged. What this company did, and these are couple of founders who are not Indian, they saw the problem in India, they settled in India and started working on it. Annoying, expensive, and lousy energy is what a lot of Indians have. Globally 1.6 billion with no electricity. People spend on kerosene, candles, batteries, and obviously it's an extraordinarily frustrating environment where there's, in most Indian villages, most huts, there's no light after dark, kids can't study, difficult to cook, mosquitoes can be annoying, etc. So what this company did was to look at a solution which consists of a solar cell, a cell phone based orchestration of demand, and then a simple management panel. How does it work? It works on a prepaid system. So here's a kit. You get the kit along with the panel, and you then power your devices with it. You put in a small down payment, and then you get prepaid energy credits. So you consume what you pay for, and with your cell phone, using an SMS based system, you can unlock more credits based on your payment. So they've created a platform, software as a service based platform. The back end of it manages the customer request and the revenue management. There's an integrated meter, which is part of the system that the user has. So the user takes this kit and uses it at home. So typically it's a 40-watt panel, and it's able to power a few things. And the interesting thing they found was that rural users are extremely sophisticated about how to use this. So they would switch on the lights for the kids to study, rather than switching on the fan. They would, minimize the usage based on their income levels or the income patterns and so on. And this is funded by a variety of entities, Asian Development Bank, Khosla Impact, etc. So once again, coming along quite well.
So that's completely off the grid, right?
It's an independent system, yes. It's independent, standalone. You have to buy it and maintain the kit. So let me now get to the summary. I believe that India is leapfrogging to a new market economy of a kind that we may not have seen elsewhere in the world. This is a different game. There are 1 billion people who are fundamentally mobile, connected, and now starting to consume products and services. In many ways, literacy is not a requirement for e-commerce. That's what Indian consumers are saying. Infrastructure is good in India, and governance is improving. The economic signals for India are broadly positive, certainly in comparison to most parts of the world. Foreign and domestic investors are engaged in investing. Entrepreneurs in India are technically advantaged. There are a lot of them, and they are very passionate. There are demonstrable success stories that show that Indian entrepreneurs can create domestic and globally significant companies. So India 2015 and beyond, it's the right place, right time. Thank you.
Thanks for a really, rich content presentation. Can I ask to start with, what is your distinction between creating value and just creating revenue? Can you explain that a little bit more, how you want to differentiate those two?
So let me hark back to what India has done well. India had the fortune of having a relatively large pool of educated people, particularly engineering. The heritage of the British and subsequent evolution has left India with a lot of very good engineering institutions. And it is often true that Indians aspire to be educated, so the push to become an engineer or a doctor in India was very high. India therefore created, arguably, a lot more engineers than it could consume. These then became the assets for particularly the US. So, and the more engineers that were, and of course things like Y2K revolution, development of ERP, the SaaS world, etc., certainly argued for more and more engineering to be done. In some cases to be done here, in many cases to be done in development centers of foreign companies in India, or to be done as outsourcing through IBM Global Services, Accenture, Infosys, Cognizant, Wipro, etc. So this combination produced a very large bench of talent, right? And there was this, possibly because of the H-1B system, visa issues, constant flow between India to the US and back. So this sloshing of go to the US, do 2 or 3 year projects, learn, come back to India, maybe go back again. So there is constant going back and forth, has produced anything from 1 to 2 million people who are now quite sophisticated in their understanding of technology. But these were by and large what I would call brains on a stick. Very smart people who know a lot of things, but their value is, if you will, singular, right? So that singularity of value means that I'm charging for this person versus charging for a product that has been created. Now the great thing about what American companies often do is to create enduring products. So Oracle creates a product, having vested 2 years, 100 people on the product, suddenly that has got a lifetime of 10 years, 15 years, right? By and large, Indian companies had failed to do that. Now what is changing now is that creation of value is now occurring in India, both for usage in India as well as usage globally. And that's what I mean by creation of value.
Okay, thanks. That helps. Let's open the floor to questions.
What's the local view in terms of like the Facebooks and Googles and how they're trying to connect? people around the world through drones or balloons. What's the sentiment locally for those types of initiatives?
You're talking about connectivity of that a Google or a Facebook could provide through alternate methods like these balloons and drones, etc. I don't think Indians think of Facebook and Google as providing those kinds of services yet in India. There's obviously no tangible proof that it could be done. But they are among the most voluminous users of these two companies' products, right? Whether it is Gmail or Facebook. I think the second largest population of Facebook users, I think, is in India, right? Interestingly enough, just after this new government took over, there is just Prime Minister Modi, in the last 3 months, Jeff Bezos has met him, Zuckerberg has met him, some senior, I don't know, someone from, I think Sundar Pichai met him from Google. So all these players are there because they realize that India can change their outcomes. And what I understand the Prime Minister told Zuckerberg is, help, I want your help in having Facebook improve the quality of life and outcomes for India. So apparently Zuckerberg has taken that on as a mission in terms of how to produce social outcomes in terms of economic, socioeconomic benefit.
Okay, thank you. Down front, you had a question.
Yeah. What are the demographics like for startup entrepreneurs? Are they hot shots from undergrad or older, experienced businessmen or what?
If I look at, this is changing quite dramatically. It used to be the oldies. It used to be people who have been here, gone back, got money. Now I'm going to do a startup. To now kids who are graduating from an engineering institution saying I want to do a startup. So I judge some of these competitions. I've been in many of these festivals kind of thing. I would say the average age is probably now 26 to 30. It's typically 2 or 3 guys who have, or gals who have been together in a college. The entrepreneur bug has bit them. I'll tell you one key thing which is happening. They have now realized, particularly in the software industry, is there is practically no risk to doing so. There are IT jobs always available. They could at any time say, heck, my startup is not working, and they would find a job in an Infosys or a Symantec or a Facebook, etc. In fact, they also realize that failure is actually good. To be able to say, I tried a startup, we did this, that, and the other, and it's all right, I gave up, and now I'm ready to work. So this ability to say that I can take risk, which is very true of why Silicon Valley succeeds. I am willing to take risk with my profession, with my career, because I know that risk does not have a consequence of my career is short, I'm taking a financial risk, but I make it up by getting experience. So that has started to happen, and that has released the pent-up passions of a lot of people, entrepreneurs.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the rationale behind many global investors investing in companies like Flipkart and Myntra, where they are not profitable at this moment, but their only aim seems to be increasing the user base. And since given the consumer is pretty elastic, let's say if Snapdeal is giving more discount, he will immediately move to Snapdeal. So there's no sort of attachment to a given brand, Amazon or Flipkart. What do you think? Why do you think investors are betting big on these companies when someone with huge money like Amazon can just enter the market and take over there?
It's a simple thing. It's the same game that Amazon is playing, right? Why does Amazon do what it's doing? Amazon is an amazingly unprofitable company, right? It's just, I mean, even the latest results say so, right? It's a very large company. Its revenues are huge and growing quite dramatically. Its profitability is laser thin or negative, right? But what Amazon is doing is got a profound logic, which is if I am the dominant player, customers will automatically come to me. So today, there's no question that if you want to buy a book, you'll go to Amazon. In fact, if most things you would go to Amazon. And it's because Jeff Bezos has repeatedly invested in saying, let me get that customer mind share so that they believe that I am the game in town. In the Indian marketplace, we are at a very early stage of that evolution. The mind share capture is ridiculously small. So customers are saying, sure, Snapdeal gives me a better deal, I'm going there. But they will play the game, and these guys have to figure it out in terms of a lot more money and a lot more traction to demonstrate that they deserve that support, right? So it's a game that has to be fought, and we'll see 2-3 key players emerge out of that.
So I want to.
These small players can be a good acquisition candidate for all the bigger companies as well. That's one of the reasons, though they are making big loss, they tend to promote a lot of things and get their customer base set.
So they might be acquired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Myntra was just acquired by Flipkart, right?
I want to follow up on this too, because last week in our presentation, Xiao mentioned that there are 1,300 Groupon lookalikes in China, right? So in that system, you continue to have a lot of very small competitors who persist. Whereas in the US, once 2 or 3 companies become dominant, other people kind of move away from that space, unless they really do it in a noticeably different way. How does India fit into that spectrum? Do you see the kind of pattern of consolidation that you do here, the acquisition?
See, let's look at the retail environment. Let's look at the way retail evolved. So we all started out with a lot of local stores, many of which we are familiar with. We would walk by, drive by, and say, okay, I will go to this entity for my clothes and that entity for my shoes, etc. And at some point, we got the evolution of big box stores, right? And you had the concept of malls, and you said, okay, Sears is in that corner and JCPenney is in that corner. Now you say, okay, I can go to one place and get everything that I want, right? And for that, to accrue that advantage, Sears and Pennies and others had to spend a lot to say, let me get that mind share, and I can get you all the things that you need in one place and satisfy your needs, right? In many ways, online is repeating that. So we are going to have players who, a lot of little players are going to say, but why not me, right? And people will experiment. And if they get a better deal, absolutely they'll choose that. But they're also going to say, but is this person, this entity trustworthy? Are they reliable? Will they actually deliver to me? And this is where I think the presence of an Amazon, etc., starts to blow away the competition. They say, Amazon, known for delivery, guaranteed quality. I can return the product if I don't like it. A smaller player may not be able to guarantee those things. So the customer is constantly checking, validating, verifying. So for certain kinds of transactions, they'll go to the name brand. If it's ad hoc, there's no consequence to making the selection, they would make the alternate selection and so on. But it's a game very early in its play. The winners are as likely to be today's players or new ones that come along.
Okay, thanks. So in that regard, what do you think is going to happen with the David and Goliath stories? Any
if I had to guess, Amazon would become dominant in India. Assuming that
will they buy out Flipkart, or is Flipkart too big?
They did offer to buy out Flipkart. I think they gave them $1 billion valuation, and Flipkart declined it. Flipkart is now being funded by relatively serious players who see that this is a market worth fighting for. But I think Amazon will come out number 1. I think in the second case, the dynamics of Indian buyers, sellers may be a little bit complicated for Groupon to manage. So in that case, I would argue that Snapdeal has got an advantage, but I also suspect Snapdeal could be bought out. In the third game, which is Ola Cabs versus Uber, I think there's good likelihood that Ola would give Uber a run for its money, maybe become the Avis to a Hertz, but it's not clear who's the Avis and who's the Hertz.
Okay, kind of following up on that, we're seeing some of the Chinese companies that have recently become huge, like Huawei and these companies, really going global, right? Alibaba listing itself in the U.S. So Infosys and Wipro were years ago when they really went global. And do you see any of these new companies like Flipkart really trying to compete in markets outside India, really going global outside there?
I think Flipkart kind of companies, currently at least, I think are India-centric, India-focused, because it requires a lot of logistics in order to make that happen, and they might not have the wherewithal to fight a global battle. Where I see Indian companies advantaged are companies who have created, like a WOOKR, who have very transportable value, where the globalization doesn't have on-the-ground logistics operations.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Indian companies could be advantaged in that play.
Okay. One more question kind of on the incubation side. In your presentation, it sort of looked like there was a wave of government incubators before the angels came in. Then the angels came in and suddenly we didn't hear about incubation stories.
And not so true. I would say the tendency of government institutions, which may be true even of the US, is it's easy to set up these kinds of facilities, and then there is very little governance associated with the utility of them.
Yeah.
So they continue on for an endless period of time, whereas VCs are quick to change. They
Yeah.
see things don't work, and they change their pattern of lending, they change the stage at which they invest, they change the amount, and as a consequence, they are able to dynamically differentiate and discriminate between how to create value. I would argue the government should be less in the incubation business and be more in making sure the economy functions better at that level. But for a variety of circumstances, obviously, all governments put some money into, making these kinds of facilities available.
Okay, great. Bevan?
Let's follow up that question here. How many of those incubator centers are still alive? Or they went away?
They don't go away.
Now, most of them are government incubated. In fact, more incubators are starting up, very large ones.
Even without too much results?
So I think the results are often indirect. So I should not be so negative. See, some of these things, so you could ask, for instance, what is the value of a school? Why doesn't the school produce geniuses? But the reality is the school has to graduate these kids, and maybe they will become geniuses after some time. So in some sense, incubators also have that function, which is let me groom a future entrepreneur. And there's no harm in that as long as the government sees that as a part of its financial portfolio to fulfill. So there are a lot of them still alive. I would say more are coming, and it provides a training ground for a lot of entrepreneurs. So they start thinking of, I need to create a business plan. I need to find my team. I need to be able to speak well. I need to be able to articulate a value proposition. I need to create something. All those things do happen in incubators. That they do not become very valuable companies is one aspect of what you can say that is a failure. It is true, but it's also true that there is success in a different dimension.
To add to your point, even companies like Citrix are starting their incubation centers in India, and they are starting their program in India. So there are a lot of Y Combinator kind of thing is coming up in India these days.
Right.
There are two categories, I would say. One is like B2C and B2B2B. These are two kinds of segments which is happening right now in India.
Okay, two last questions. Back in the back first.
What can India learn from the Silicon Valley experience, and what can Silicon Valley learn from India?
I would say they are learning from each other already. A lot of Silicon Valley is in many ways has got Indian influence in it, in terms of companies being created, CEOs, CTOs, engineering, etc. So a lot of great companies here have Indian DNA in it. A lot of that learning has transmitted itself to India. So if you visit Bangalore, you'll see the dynamic of Bangalore is in many ways similar to Silicon Valley. Not all the artifacts are there, but there is enough now to have an ecosystem which is quite powerful. What can the US learn from India? The reality is the world is changing, and it may be that structures in the US are not changing fast enough. It's inevitable that successful systems tend to hold on to things that work, right? So we are sitting on, I would argue, 30, 40 years of legacy software now in this country. Those are not as user-centric as some of the new software that is being created. So let me give you an illustration. India is in its early stages of, I would argue, governance. Governance in India is relatively primitive, citizen contact is poor, but the new government says, here is mygov.in. I want you as a citizen to sign in, and I want to communicate to you directly. You can now find X, Y, and Z about the way my government functions, right? This is true of the way the railway system is being set up. You instantaneously, it's a huge bureaucracy, but it still functions quite well because it is set up with a new thought in mind, which is inherently user-centric, inherently web-based, mobile-based, inherently connectable for end users to use the system. Legacy systems, on the other hand, have a hard time making that leap. What they try to do is to adapt. They say, here is rigid legacy software, let me create a mobile version of it. Now, that mobile version, unfortunately, has got the trappings of the legacy environment, right? So we have got that in the US. You take our healthcare system, amazingly primitive in many ways. And we struggle to put up a healthcare system which says, I as a citizen should have access to my records, right? So India in many ways is creating a new economy built on much more robust technology foundations. But the journey has just begun.
Reminds me about the joke about God. They say that God could only create the world in 6 days because there was no legacy issues.
Nice one.
Last question, Etan?
That was a fantastic overview. It would seem to me, based on things that I've read, based on your presentation and other people I've met, Indian startups seem to have a really great advantage in developing worlds or emerging markets models because they live it. Even if you are very well educated, and even if you're in a city or a town with good infrastructure, there are people all around you who don't have that. So could you comment a little bit about, the fact that, and again, a good example would be last year in your class, you had a company that was doing mobile search over feature phones. Brilliant. Who here would think of doing that? Nobody carries around those phones over here. Could you comment about that advantage a bit? Because Africa is growing like mad right now.
Correct. Let me answer that question in a roundabout way. Some of you might have heard of something called MOM. It's the Mars orbiter that India developed, right? Now, Mars orbiter worked the following way. Unlike the system that NASA developed, it did not put too much emphasis on its powering stages. Instead, what it did was it used Earth's gravity to propel itself. So the Mars orbiter went around the Earth several times. As a consequence, it now generated more and more velocity, and at some point it released itself from the Earth's orbit. So it catapulted itself using gravity as a mechanism of propulsion onto a Mars orbit. Then it secured the Mars orbit and is now providing great photographs. This is a good analogy to what's happening to Indian companies. So Indian companies are like the Mars orbiters. They don't have much financial power, unlike US companies. But what they are doing, I would think smartly, is to say, let me first orbit around India. Let me validate the Indian business model, make sure I can get customers, I can get traction, refine my orbiter. Once I have secured that, I now launch myself to get traction in the US. US is a clear trajectory. US is the Mars for Indian companies. So they then come to the US and secure the orbit and hopefully get acquired or go IPO. So that's a model of traction in India, exit in the US. The reason it works is India is a sufficiently large economy. It's not so small that you cannot experiment. All these business models are available. People have mobile phones, people have access, connectivity is dramatically better, people have propensity to spend, and therefore you can validate your business models, right, in the new market economy, in the new technology, democratized technology that I talked about. As a consequence, you validate those, Now you're ready for Africa, you're ready for Europe, you're ready for the US.
Sri, I want to join you again, join everybody. Thanks very much for a great presentation.